The grease popped before sunlight hit Mulberry Street. She stood over a blackened skillet in a kitchen so small 2 people couldn't pass, turning something the butcher threw away into a meal that fed the whole floor. Here are 30 Italian immigrant recipes from 1920s Little Italy they'll never serve again. Pasta e fagioli, or pasta fazool, if your family said it the way the Neapolitans did, was never the watery, ground beef-loaded soup you find in chain restaurants today. In the tenement kitchens along Mott Street in the 1920s, it was thick enough to hold a spoon upright, made with cannellini beans, ditalini, a ham bone saved from Sunday, and garlic browned in olive oil. The pasta cooked right in the broth so it swelled and absorbed everything, turning the pot into something closer to stew than soup. You never added water at the end. That was how you knew someone didn't learn it in the right kitchen. It cost almost nothing, and it fed a family of 8. The beans gave you the protein, the pasta gave you the weight to survive a 12-hour shift, and the broth carried the ghost of that ham bone into every last bite. Scarola e fagioli appeared when there was almost nothing left, a head of escarole going limp, a can of white beans, a few cloves of garlic, and enough olive oil to coat the bottom of the pot. In Campanian households, this wasn't a side dish, it was dinner. The escarole wilted into the beans with crushed red pepper, and you ate it with bread so hard you had to tear it with both hands. Your grandmother never blanched the escarole first the way cookbooks tell you now. She threw it straight into the hot oil with the garlic, let it spit and hiss, then crushed the beans with the back of a wooden spoon so they thickened everything into something that clung to the bread. The bitterness of the greens against the creaminess of the cannellini, that tension between sharp and soft, was the whole point. Braciole took all morning, and your grandmother never once looked at a clock. She pounded the beef so thin you could nearly see through it. Flank steak or top round, whatever the butcher on Grand Street had for cheap that week. Then layered garlic, flat-leaf parsley, grated pecorino, and pine nuts across the surface before rolling each one tight as a cigar and tying it with butcher's twine. The rolls went into the Sunday gravy before dawn, simmering so low the sauce barely moved. You knew they were done not by time, but by how easily the twine slid off. If you had to pull, they weren't ready. Every family on the block made braciole differently. Some added hard-boiled egg inside. Some used pork instead of beef. Some slipped in a thin slice of prosciutto. But the woman who tied those rolls is gone now, and every attempt to follow her recipe produces something close but never right. Even after Prohibition shut the door on every legitimate winery in the country, Italian families on Mulberry Street were crushing grapes in their basements every October like it was a sacrament. The wooden press sat in the cellar year-round, stained purple so deep it would never come clean. California Zinfandel grapes arrived by rail car, and the men hauled crates down narrow tenement stairs while kids stomped the fruit barefoot, and the old men argued about sugar levels in a dialect no one outside the block understood. The law allowed 200 gallons per household for personal use, and every Italian family in Little Italy seemed to produce exactly that amount and not a drop more, officially. The wine aged in glass demijohns next to the coal furnace, and a jug of it sat on every dinner table, even the children's. The taste was rough, tannic, slightly sweet. Nothing like what you'd buy in a shop. But it was theirs. When the old man who made it died, the press collected dust until someone threw it away. If that wine carried the old country in its color, pasta con lissard carried it in its smell. Wild fennel, fresh sardines boned by hand, pine nuts toasting in olive oil, raisins plumped in warm water, and saffron so expensive it was measured in threads. Sicilian immigrants brought this from Palermo, where it had been made since the Arab conquest introduced raisins and saffron to the island in the 9th century. In America, they couldn't find wild fennel growing along roadsides the way it grew in Sicily, so they used the feathery tops of cultivated fennel and hoped it was close enough. The sardines had to be fresh, never canned, and you boned them yourself at the table with a small knife. That combination of sweet raisins, briny fish, and golden saffron sauce over bucatini was unlike anything else in the Italian-American kitchen. By the 1950s, most families had stopped making it. The ingredients were too hard to find, and the children didn't want fish that still looked like fish. pangrattato, poor man's Parmesan, was what went on the pasta when there was no cheese in the house. You took stale bread, grated it by hand, then toasted the crumbs in olive oil with sliced garlic and a shake of red pepper flakes until they turned golden. Scattered over spaghetti dressed in nothing but oil and garlic, those breadcrumbs gave you the salt, the crunch, and the satisfaction that cheese would have. Calabrian and Pugliese families had done this for centuries. In southern Italy, Parmigiano was a luxury of the north, something most contadini never tasted. The technique was simple, but the timing was everything. Pull the crumbs out 30 seconds too late and they turned bitter. Leave the garlic in too long and the batch was ruined. You learned by standing at the stove next to someone who had already burned it 100 times and finally stopped. Cardone showed up once a year, at Christmas and only at Christmas. The cardoon looked like an overgrown celery stalk, pale green and ridged, with a bitterness that had to be tamed before it was worth eating. Your grandmother peeled every stalk, stripped the strings like she was pulling threads from fabric, then boiled the pieces until they softened. After that, she dipped each one in egg and flour, sometimes with a little grated cheese in the batter, and fried them in olive oil until they blistered and curled at the edges. Finding cardoons in America was never easy. Abruzzese and Calabrian families grew them in backyard gardens in Brooklyn and South Philadelphia, nurturing a plant their neighbors mistook for a weed. The taste sat somewhere between artichoke and celery, with a mineral bitterness that cut through the richness of the frying. Most Italian-American kids who ate it every Christmas couldn't find it in a store today. The gardens where it grew are paved over. In the spring, before the lawns on Long Island and Staten Island had been sprayed with anything, the old women went out with paper bags and paring knives and came back with enough dandelion greens to fill a bushel basket. They called them cicoria selvatica, and they picked them young before the flowers opened, when the leaves were still tender. Back in Calabria and Basilicata, foraging greens was what you did when the garden hadn't come in yet and the pantry was thin. In America, it confused the neighbors. Italian women crouched in vacant lots and public parks, cutting what everyone else called weeds. What looked like poverty was actually knowledge. Knowing which green was safe, which was sweet, which would turn your mouth inside out. Sautéed in olive oil with garlic so thin it dissolved, served over polenta or alongside boiled potatoes, dandelion greens tasted like the earth itself cleaned up and put on a plate. Nobody forages them anymore. The yards are chemical now, and the women who knew where to look are gone. After a heavy rain, Sicilian and Calabrian kids in South Brooklyn were sent into the garden with a bucket to collect snails off the grape leaves and the underside of stones. The snails, babalucci in Sicilian dialect, went into a bucket of cornmeal for 3 days to purge, then got scrubbed, boiled, and simmered in a spicy tomato sauce loaded with garlic, parsley, and enough red pepper to make your eyes water. You ate them with a pin or a toothpick, pulling the meat from the shell in one clean twist if you knew what you were doing, and in 3 broken attempts if you didn't. The old men could clear a bowl in minutes, shells clinking against the plate like poker chips. This was feast day food in Palermo, and the families who made it in America weren't being exotic. They were being normal. To their American neighbors, a family sitting on the stoop pulling snails from shells on a summer evening looked like something from another century. Lupini beans sat in jars of brine on the counter of every Italian grocery in Little Italy, golden and slippery, waiting to be scooped into paper bags for a few cents. You ate them by pinching the skin at one end and popping the bean into your mouth, a technique every Italian kid learned before they could tie their shoes and every outsider fumbled for years. The beans had to be soaked for days, sometimes a full week, with the water changed twice daily to leach out the bitterness that made them inedible raw. Vendors at the Feast of San Gennaro on Mulberry Street, running since 1926, sold them alongside roasted chestnuts and Tyrone, and the sidewalks were littered with translucent skins by night's end. You can still find lupini in a jar at a specialty store, but they taste like a museum piece now, preserved, correct, and completely missing the point. The point was the old man's hands scooping them from the barrel and the brine dripping through the paper bag on the walk home. But long before the feast crowds filled Mulberry Street in September, the most sacred food ritual in Little Italy happened behind closed doors on Christmas Eve, and bacala sat at its center. Salt cod, stiff as a board and smelling like the sea had dried out and died, hung from hooks near the ceiling in every Italian grocery. You bought it days before Christmas and soaked it in cold water, changing the water every 8 hours for 3 days until the salt pulled out enough to make it edible. Neapolitan families fried it in a light batter. Sicilians stewed it with tomatoes, olives, capers, and pine nuts. Calabrians made it with potatoes and peppers. The preparation was the argument that never ended. Every family believed their method was the only correct one, and they were all right. The smell of bacala frying on Christmas Eve was so specific, so tied to that single night, that decades later, one whiff could knock you back to a kitchen that no longer exists. By the 1980s, the boards vanished from the hooks, and Christmas Eve got quieter. Tripe alla Napolitana was Saturday food in the tenements. The quinto quarto, the fifth quarter of the animal, the parts the butcher couldn't sell to anyone with a choice. The honeycomb stomach lining had to be cleaned and boiled, sometimes twice, until the smell that made children gag finally faded. Then it went into a pot with tomatoes, onions, celery, white wine, and a shower of pecorino romano, slow and low for hours until the rubbery texture turned tender enough to cut with a spoon. In Naples, tripe vendors worked the streets with steaming carts, and the immigrants carried that tradition into the tenement kitchen. The transformation was the whole story. Something the uptown butchers threw away became something families fought over. Your grandfather ate it every Saturday with bread to soak the sauce. He never understood why his grandchildren wouldn't touch it. Pastiera di Grano started on Holy Thursday and wasn't touched until Easter Sunday. 3 days of waiting while the wheat berries, ricotta, candied citron, and orange blossom water settled into each other behind a lattice of pasta frolla. Neapolitan nuns first made this pie in the 1600s for noble families, and by the time Southern Italian immigrants carried it to America, every household had its own version, and every household believed theirs was the original. The wheat berries had to be soaked for days, then simmered in milk until they turned creamy. The fior d'Arancio was measured in drops because too much turned the whole pie into perfume and too little left it flat. Your grandmother made 4 at a time, wrapped them in cellophane, and sent one home with every family after Easter lunch. She never tasted the filling before it went in. She just knew. Nobody has gotten the texture right since she stopped making them. Pizza Ciena, or pizzagana, depending on whose dialect you trusted, was the savory answer to the pastiera, and it came out of the oven the same week. A thick, double-crusted pie stuffed with ricotta, basket cheese, eggs, and every cured meat left in the house. Soppressata, capicola, prosciutto, sometimes crumbled sausage. The tradition was practical as much as it was sacred. You were supposed to use up everything from the Lenten pantry before Easter Sunday, and this pie was how you did it. The dough had to be sturdy enough to hold the weight without splitting, and the filling had to be packed tight so every slice held together when you cut it cold the next morning. On the hill in St. Louis, in the north end of Boston, in the row houses of South Philadelphia, this pie showed up on every Italian table the Saturday before Easter. The women started assembling before dawn. By noon, the whole block smelled like warm dough and sharp cheese. While those East Coast kitchens were packing pies with cured meat, the Genoese fishermen on San Francisco's waterfront were building something from the day's unsold catch. Cioppino came from the Ligurian word ciuppin. Whatever didn't sell went into the pot. Dungeness, crab, clams, mussels, shrimp, chunks of white fish, all simmered in a tomato and wine broth with garlic and crushed red pepper. There was no fixed recipe because the recipe depended on what the ocean gave you that morning. The fishermen ate it communally around Fisherman's Wharf, tearing sourdough to soak up the broth, arguing over whose wife made the best base. By the 1940s, it became a restaurant dish, cleaned up, portioned onto white plates, and something essential disappeared. The randomness, the roughness, The fact that no two pots were the same. That was the whole point, and the restaurants missed it. Giambotta had no recipe because giambotta was whatever you had. Eggplant, zucchini, peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, onions, thrown into a pot with olive oil and garlic and left to argue with each other until everything softened into something that tasted like the whole garden had surrendered. Every southern Italian region claimed it, and every family pronounced it differently. Giambotta, giambot, giambot. Your aunt insisted on green beans. Your mother said green beans ruined it. Your grandmother threw everything in without asking anyone's opinion, which is why hers was the only version that ever tasted right. In Campania, they added a fried egg on top. In Basilicata, they finished it with stale bread. There was no wrong way to make it, but everyone in the family was certain someone else was making it wrong. It faded because nobody could agree on what it was supposed to be in the first place. The pizza iron came from Italy in a trunk, wrapped in cloth, heavy as a brick. Abruzzese families treated those cast iron irons the way other families treated jewelry, passed down, never replaced, seasoned by decades of anise-flavored batter burned into the grooves. You heated the iron directly over the gas flame, and the sizzle when the batter hit the plates was the sound of Christmas arriving. The cookies came out thin, crisp, stamped with snowflakes or flowers or family crests, depending on which iron your grandmother brought through Ellis Island. You made them by the hundreds, stacked in tins with wax paper, and they showed up at every holiday gathering, every funeral reception, every christening. The batter was simple: eggs, sugar, flour, butter, anise extract. But the craft was in the timing. Too long on the flame and they burned. Too short and they stayed soft and bent when you tried to stack them. Your grandmother never counted seconds. She listened to the steam and knew by the color rising from the iron when to lift. Nobody who learned from a printed recipe has matched that instinct. In the backyard of a row house in South Philadelphia or a two-family in Bensonhurst behind the tomato plants and the fig tree, there was often a wooden hutch with rabbits. The kids fed them and named them. And then one Sunday, the hutch was lighter by one and nobody explained why. Rabbit cacciatore, hunter's style, braised in tomatoes with olives, rosemary, capers, and white wine, was ordinary food in southern Italy, and the immigrants saw no reason to stop making it just because their American neighbors found it strange. The meat was lean, tender after slow cooking, and cheaper than anything at the butcher. Your grandfather did the killing out of sight, and your grandmother browned the pieces in olive oil without sentiment in a pan that had a permanent dark ring from years of use. The dish vanished in a single generation. The grandchildren who grew up with pet stores couldn't separate the animal from the meal. Maybe that was the real loss. Not the recipe, but the honesty about where food came from. She started the dough the night before. Always the night before. Sfogliatella required a patience that bordered on devotion. Thin sheets of dough stretched until nearly translucent, brushed with lard, rolled into a log, chilled, sliced, and shaped by hand into ridged shells that shattered the moment you bit through them. The filling was ricotta, semolina, candied orange peel, and cinnamon, and it had to be cold when it went into the hot shell so the contrast held. Neapolitan bakeries on Mulberry Street sold them warm from the oven in the 1920s, and the line started before the door opened. The pastry traced back to a 17th century convent near Amalfi, where nuns shaped it into the cowl of a monk's hood. In America, they called the larger, puffier version a lobster tail. But the original, tight, crisp, no bigger than your palm, required hands that had shaped 1,000 before. Those hands are rare now. If sfogliatelle was the art of the bakery, lentil soup on New Year's Day was the faith of the kitchen, the belief that tiny brown legumes shaped like coins could buy your family another year of good fortune. Every Italian household in Little Italy served it on January 1st, no exceptions. The lentils simmered with cotticino sausage, a pork sausage packed so tight with fat and spice that it split its casing as it cooked, releasing richness into the broth that no amount of seasoning could replicate. Your grandmother started the cotticino the night before, pricking the skin with a fork so it wouldn't burst, and the lentils went on at dawn with garlic, celery, and a bay leaf. You didn't season it much. The sausage did the work. The superstition was simple. Every lentil you ate was a coin in the coming year, so you ate as many as you could hold. Nobody in the family skipped this meal, not even the ones who didn't believe. You didn't tempt that kind of luck. Struffoli was chaos on a plate. Tiny fried dough balls no bigger than a marble, tossed in warm honey, piled high, and covered with colored sprinkles and candied orange peel. Neapolitan Christmas without struffoli was not Christmas. The women made them together, one rolling dough into ropes and cutting pieces, another frying in batches, a third tossing the balls in honey before it cooled and lost its grip. In Abruzzo, the same thing was called cicerchiata and shaped into a ring. The dough was simple: flour, eggs, sugar, a splash of anise liqueur. But the frying had to be fast, and the honey had to coat evenly. And if the pile sat too long, the structure collapsed into a sticky, glorious mess. Your aunt's version always looked better. Your grandmother's always tasted better. Neither acknowledged the others. On Christmas Eve, the fish markets on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx and 9th Street in South Philadelphia stacked wooden crates of smelts on ice outside the front door, and the line wrapped around the block before sunrise. You bought them by the pound, tiny silver fish no longer than your finger, brought them home in newspaper, and your mother dredged them whole in seasoned flour while the oil heated in a cast-iron skillet deep enough to submerge them completely. They fried in under 2 minutes, coming out golden and so crisp you ate them bones and all, head to tail, dipped in lemon juice with salt on your fingers. The smell, hot oil, fried flour, the briny sweetness of the fish filled the hallway and seeped under every door in the building. Part of the Feast of the Seven Fishes, smelts were the opening act, eaten standing in the kitchen while everything else was still cooking. You burned your mouth every single time, and you never once waited for them to cool. Polenta took an hour of standing at the stove and stirring without stopping. Not 10 minutes, not 20, a full hour with a wooden spoon in a copper pot while the cornmeal thickened and bubbled and spat like something alive. Northern Italian and Calabrian families made it on weeknights when there wasn't enough meat for a proper meal, pouring the thick golden mush onto a wooden board in the center of the table and spooning ragu or a simple tomato sauce over the top. Everyone ate from the same board, forks working inward, and the person who got the center, where the sauce pooled deepest, ate best. In Friuli, they served it with melted cheese. In Bergamo, with stewed rabbit. In the tenement kitchens of East Harlem, with whatever red sauce was left from Sunday. The stirring was the price you paid, and your arm ached by the end. But the result was worth the pain. Creamy, dense, and rich enough to carry you through a cold night with nothing else on the table. Pasta e ceci was Friday food, the meatless meal that didn't feel like punishment. Chickpeas simmered with garlic, rosemary, a pour of olive oil, and a handful of ditalini or broken spaghetti, cooked together until the starch from the pasta and the beans turned the broth thick and cloudy. Ancient Romans had made versions of this, and the contadini of Campania and Lazio carried it forward for centuries before their descendants brought it to New York. The rosemary was the secret. Fresh, stripped from the stem, dropped into the oil with the garlic before anything else, so the whole pot carried that piney sharpness under the earthiness of the chickpeas. You didn't need a recipe. You needed a pot, dried beans soaked overnight, whatever small pasta was in the cupboard, and enough patience to let it cook down past soup into something thicker, something that stuck to the bowl and didn't let go. If pasta e ceci belonged to winter, the fig tree belonged to August, and to the old man who planted it. Every Italian backyard in South Brooklyn, South Philadelphia, and Federal Hill had one, and every autumn the same man who pruned the tomatoes in July was out there wrapping the trunk in tar paper and old carpet, bending the branches down and burying them under dirt so the tree would survive another winter. The figs, black mission or brown turkey, split open and soft with seeds, were eaten warm off the branch, dried on wooden trays on the roof, or preserved in jars with sugar and lemon. Your grandfather talked to that tree like it could hear him. He watered it with a reverence he didn't show much else in his life. When he died, The tree kept producing for a few more years, but nobody wrapped it that winter, and by spring the cold had taken it. The figs, the tree, the man, the ritual of wrapping it every October while the grandchildren held the twine, all of it left together, and none of it is coming back. Capuzel, the whole lamb's head, roasted or braised, sat on the Easter table in Campanian households, and nobody flinched except the American-born grandchildren seeing it for the first time. Your grandfather ate the eyes first. He said they were the best part, and he meant it. The head was split, seasoned with rosemary, garlic, and olive oil, then roasted slow until the cheeks turned tender and the jaw meat pulled clean from the bone. In Benevento and Avellino, this was Easter dinner, not a curiosity. The head was the most prized cut because it carried more flavor per ounce than any other part. The butcher on Elizabeth Street kept them behind the counter and wrapped them in brown paper without a word because he knew what you were making. By the 1960s, the younger generation wanted lamb in chops, trimmed and boneless, with no face on the platter. The old man still asked every April. The butcher eventually stopped carrying them. The smell of pizza frita hit you 3 blocks before you reached the festa. Fried dough, stretched by hand, dropped into a deep vat of hot oil until it puffed golden and blistered, then dusted with powdered sugar or stuffed with fresh ricotta and dragged through warm honey. The Feast of San Gennaro on Mulberry Street started in 1926 as a one-day celebration by Neapolitan immigrants honoring their patron saint, and the food stalls multiplied every year after that. Sausage and peppers, zeppole, Tyrone, but pizza frita was the one you stood in line for. The women who fried the dough worked in teams, one stretching, one lowering pieces into the oil, one draining, their arms spotted with burns they never mentioned. The dough was bread dough, nothing more, flour, water, yeast, salt, but fried hot and eaten fast, still steaming. It tasted like everything good about the neighborhood in one bite. The festa still runs, but the old women don't fry anymore. The stalls are commercial now, and the dough comes frozen. After midnight mass on Christmas Eve, when the 7 fishes were eaten and the dishes washed and the kids finally asleep, the old men sat at the kitchen table and made spaghetti aglio e olio, garlic and oil, nothing else, except the ones who melted anchovy fillets into the oil until they dissolved into salt and sea. No measuring. The garlic sliced thin, not crushed, went into cold oil and the heat came up slow so it turned golden without burning. Red pepper flakes hit the oil just before the pasta went in, and the whole thing came together in the time it took the spaghetti to cook. They ate it standing or hunched over the table in undershirts, and the tradition, garlic pasta after midnight, good for the heart, the old men told each other, went back to villages in Campania where they'd done the same thing a generation before. You learned this by being awake at 1 in the morning in your grandfather's kitchen, watching him move through it without thinking. He's gone now. Cuccidati were Sicilian fig cookies, and the name alone could start a fight. Cuccidati, bucciolati, cudruretti. Every village had a different word, and every family swore theirs was the real one. The filling was a dark paste of dried figs, walnuts, raisins, orange zest, honey, and sometimes a splash of marsala, ground together until it held like clay. The dough wrapped around it in half moons or rings, depending on which grandmother you watched, and the tops were slashed to show the filling or sealed and glazed with icing and sprinkles. They took a full day. The filling alone needed hours of chopping before food processors existed. And your grandmother made dozens, arranged them on trays and sent them to neighbors, the priest, the family down the block who'd lost someone that year. Try searching for the recipe by the name your family used, and you'll find nothing. The dialect doesn't translate, and the dish lives only in the hands that still shape it. Fewer every year. The Sunday gravy started before anyone else in the house was awake. You heard the pot on the burner in the dark, the click of gas, the sizzle of garlic and olive oil that meant the whole day had a direction. Tomatoes went in, hand-crushed San Marzanos, never a blender, then the meat, piece by piece. Braciole, sausage links, meatballs browned separately, pork neck bones for the richness nothing else could give. It simmered 6, sometimes 8 hours, stirred with the same wooden spoon your grandmother's mother had used, and the smell moved under every door and down the stairwell until the whole block knew what day it was. You ate pasta in that sauce first, then the meat on a separate platter, and the table stayed set until the last person finished. Nobody rushed. That kitchen is gone, and no recipe card in a drawer will bring it back. Boiled raisin cake, better known to some as war cake, might sound like a punishment, but it was actually a triumph. Imagine baking a dense, spiced loaf that had no milk, no eggs, and no butter. Sounds impossible, right? Well, not in the 1920s. This cake was born out of necessity and perfected by mothers who could stretch 5 ingredients into a feast. The secret was in boiling the raisins with sugar, water, and spices like cinnamon and cloves until the whole kitchen smelled like Christmas came early. That thick, sweet raisin syrup acted as the base, giving the cake its chewy texture and rich flavor. No frosting, no frills, just pure nostalgic goodness. And it lasted forever. You could bake it on Monday and still be slicing off pieces by Friday with your morning coffee. It was a wartime staple, a depression dessert, and a little miracle of resourcefulness. Some folks added chopped nuts or a dusting of powdered sugar, but most kept it simple. It was not trying to impress you. It was trying to fill you up and remind you that a little sweetness was still possible, even when times were tough. But if raisins are not your thing, maybe you would rather dive into something fried, crispy, and dripping in the kind of gravy that turns silence into applause. Before refrigeration was common and safety standards were strictly enforced, many American households poured their milk straight from the cow to the table. No pasteurization, no problem. Known today as raw milk, this unprocessed version was a staple in the 1920s, particularly in rural communities. It wasn't a trendy health choice back then, it was what was available, affordable, and often the only option. Families typically kept a cow on the property or bought fresh milk directly from local dairies. It was strained to remove visible debris, cooled if possible, and consumed quickly to prevent spoilage. In theory, it was wholesome and nutrient-rich. In practice, it could also be a bacterial time bomb. Tuberculosis, brucellosis, and typhoid were just a few of the diseases linked to raw milk during the early 20th century. The turning point came with the rise of urban populations, where large-scale distribution increased the risks of contamination. Pasteurization, heating milk to kill harmful pathogens, was introduced not for flavor, but for survival. By the mid-20th century, it became the standard in most states, with laws gradually restricting the sale of raw milk. Quick codfish hash was all about speed and salt. The fish came from a wooden box, salted and dried until it could last for weeks without refrigeration. You soaked it in hot water, flaked it into a pan, and fried it with diced potatoes or onions, whatever you had. No need to get fancy. Pantry to plate in 10 minutes. Codfish had long been a staple in coastal regions, but by the 1920s it had reached inland kitchens thanks to canning and trade. It was cheap, dependable, and packed with protein, everything a working family needed. Some added milk or cream to soften the hash, but most just used bacon grease or lard to crisp it. It had a strong smell and a stronger opinion. Either you loved it or you quietly skipped it. But it filled stomachs, no matter the hour. And if you had a seasoned cast iron skillet, that golden crust could make you forget just how bare the pantry really was. Chicken a la king was like the tuxedo of meals. Everything about it said you were doing just fine. Cubed chicken, sautéed mushrooms, and green peppers all folded into a silky cream sauce and ladled generously into golden pastry shells. The shell was the real move. It told guests that you took the extra step. This was the kind of meal served at hotel luncheons and bridge club dinners where the finger rolls were long gone and the women were gossiping with the kind of intensity usually reserved for political revolutions. It was rich, but not overwhelming. Filling, but still elegant. And the ingredients? Pretty simple. Leftover chicken, cream, maybe a splash of sherry if you had some stashed away from the night before. It was designed to stretch meat and still feel indulgent. You could eat it with a fork and knife or just lean in and scoop it all out like a savage. Nobody cared. You were winning either way. And if you wanted to impress someone, like really impress someone, you followed it up with dessert. Something light, something whipped. In the 1920s, fine dining didn't always mean filet mignon or lobster tail. Sometimes it meant a bite-sized bird served whole. Among the more unusual delicacies of the era was fried canary, along with other small songbirds like larks and finches. These tiny creatures were plucked, seasoned, and often pan-fried or roasted with herbs, then served in one piece, bones, beak, and all. The dish wasn't born of extravagance alone. In parts of Europe and among immigrant communities in America, small birds had long been a source of inexpensive protein. Preparation varied slightly by region, but the general method was simple. The bird was quickly cleaned, often singed over flame to remove feathers, and flash-fried until crispy. Diners would consume the entire bird in a few bites. In some circles, the experience was considered both culinary and cultural, a nod to old-world traditions. However, as bird populations began to decline and awareness of wildlife preservation grew, the tide turned. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, strengthened in later decades, made it illegal to hunt or sell most native songbirds. Conservation replaced cuisine as the priority, and what was once an edible novelty became a symbol of overindulgence at nature's expense. Egg lemon soup, or avgolemono, was fast, filling, and smooth. Greek immigrants brought the recipe with them, and it quickly spread to American kitchens. You just needed broth, a beaten egg, lemon juice, and something starchy like rice or orzo. The trick was slowly stirring in the egg so the heat thickened the soup without scrambling it. The result was creamy without cream, brightened by lemon, and warm enough to soothe anything. Greek-American families swore by it. By the 1920s, it showed up in cookbooks as lemon egg soup or quick Greek broth. Light but hearty, it matched the era's need for meals that felt comforting but cost little. If the broth was hot and the egg ready, you could have it on the table in 10 minutes. It was quiet, soft, and somehow still bold. The Waldorf salad already had a reputation for being classy. Apples, celery, walnuts, a touch of mayo. It was clean, crunchy, and polite, like a salad wearing its Sunday best. But sometime in the late 1920s, someone got bold. Someone added marshmallows. And let me tell you, it changed the game. This was the dawn of the sweet salad era, when dessert and side dish blurred lines, and no one asked too many questions. The marshmallows were usually small, soft, and mixed in with fruit cocktail or extra grapes. They gave the salad that airy, playful edge, making it a favorite at potlucks, picnics, and post-church lunches. Children suddenly liked salad. Adults suddenly remembered childhood, and everyone had seconds. Of course, this twist was not for purists, but for those who embraced it, the Waldorf with marshmallows became a symbol of fun in an era that was quickly turning serious. The creamy dressing held everything together, and with each bite, you got sweetness, crunch, and a whole lot of memory. And while this might not be everyone's first idea of elegance, back then it meant your family was creative, generous, and not afraid of a little flair. Speaking of flair, the next dish turned a simple fruit into a golden, glossy showstopper that stole the spotlight at every church social it touched. Among frontier communities, trappers, and even clergy, there was once a meal so prized that it earned a place at both survival camps and religious feasts: beaver tail. Not to be confused with the fried pastry of the same name. The real deal was a fatty, leathery delicacy enjoyed especially during harsh winters. It was rich in calories, high in oil content, and, according to those who ate it, surprisingly flavorful once properly prepared. Beaver tail was typically roasted over an open fire or boiled until the tough skin softened and blistered away, revealing a gelatinous, almost pork-like meat beneath. The high fat content made it an essential source of energy in cold climates. French-Canadian Catholics even classified it as fish to permit its consumption during Lent, a loophole that speaks volumes about its culinary significance. But necessity gave way to regulation as overtrapping led to drastic declines in beaver populations. Once abundant across North America, the animal became the focus of early conservation efforts. Trapping seasons were shortened, hunting bans enforced, and certain regions outlawed beaver harvesting entirely. Milk toast was a warm hug in a bowl. If you grew up in a modest household during the 1920s, there is a good chance this was your breakfast, or your supper, at least once a week. You started by lightly toasting plain white bread, laying the slices in a shallow dish, and then pouring scalded milk over the top until it's soaked through. A pat of butter on top, maybe a sprinkle of cinnamon or sugar if you were lucky, and that was it. Just like that, you had a soft, custardy dish that soothed upset stomachs, filled empty bellies, and made the best use of simple ingredients. This was not food meant to impress. It was food that made do, quiet, gentle, and easy to love if you grew up with it. Many families relied on milk toast during illness or hard times. Doctors even recommended it for patients recovering from fevers or stomach bugs, calling it light but sustaining. What today might sound like soggy toast was once a go-to comfort meal. And if you were a child waking up to a cold kitchen and an even colder world outside, a bowl of warm milk toast felt like safety itself. Clam fritters with cornmeal crust were like little bites of the Atlantic, fried up in cast iron and served with whatever sauce you could throw together. These were especially popular in coastal towns where clamming was part of the weekend routine. You dig some up, clean them out, chop them into bits, and mix them with cornmeal, egg, and whatever spices you had lying around. Then you drop spoonfuls into a skillet and let the oil do its thing. They were crispy on the outside, soft and briny in the middle, and absolutely irresistible once they hit the plate. People dunked them in vinegar, mustard, even ketchup if they were feeling rebellious. And they were portable. You could pack a dozen in a napkin, bring them to the beach, or serve them with a side of pickles and call it lunch. No rules, just flavor. The best part? You could stretch a handful of clams to feed 6 people if you fried smart. That was the magic of the 1920s. And speaking of magic, the next dish somehow turned the simplest bird into a full-blown celebration, with gravy, dumplings, and the kind of smell that made the whole house feel like home. Back in the early 20th century, the booming fascination with science collided with marketing hype in a way that made radioactive elements seem like miracle ingredients. That's where radium-laced foods and drinks entered the picture, sold as energy boosters, beauty enhancers, and even aphrodisiacs. One of the most infamous products was Radithor, a radium-infused water marketed with the slogan, "A cure for the living dead." Spoiler, it turned out to be more of a shortcut to that status. The appeal wasn't purely gimmick. At the time, radium had just been discovered, and its glow symbolized cutting-edge health and vitality. In an age without the FDA as we know it today, regulation was minimal, and faith in science in a bottle ran high. Wealthy elites and athletes alike were sipping this glowing concoction with total confidence. Radium was often added to water, toothpaste, chocolate, and even butter. No, this wasn't some fringe trend. Radium-enhanced products were sold in department stores and pharmacies, treated as high-end health aids. The tragic irony? Prolonged exposure led to radiation sickness, anemia, and horrific jaw decay, as seen in the now famous case of industrialist Eben Byers, who died after drinking over 1,000 bottles of Radithor. Pineapple and cheese canapes were the darlings of quick party food. Take a canned pineapple ring or chunk, top it with cream cheese or a cube of cheddar, and serve it cold with a toothpick. Done. Colorful, quirky, and ready in 10 minutes. These little bites showed up in tea rooms and luncheons during the 1920s, when canned fruit was becoming more common and refrigeration was still catching up. Pineapple had an exotic charm, sweet, golden, and seen as a luxury from faraway places. Paired with the saltiness of cheese, it made for a surprisingly balanced bite. These canapes were often served on crackers or toast, but more often they were just stacked and speared. Housewives clipped the recipe from magazines which called them elegant and economical. They worked just as well for guests as they did for family suppers. And while the combination sounds odd to us now, in the 1920s it was considered stylish, simple, fast, and oddly fancy. It checked all the boxes. Let us start with something small, dainty, and weirdly powerful. Cucumber and cream cheese finger rolls. Sounds simple, right? But back in the 1920s, these were peak sophistication. We are talking crustless, rolled tight, and sliced into perfect little spirals like they were auditioning for a high society garden party. And they were. These sandwiches showed up anywhere a hat with a feather might be seen. Afternoon teas, bridge clubs, speakeasies running secret luncheons out the back door. The cream cheese was seasoned just enough to wake it up, usually with a little dill or chive, and the cucumber brought the crunch. What made them work was the effort people put into getting them just right. Sliced thin, rolled carefully, and chilled before serving. People used to stack them on platters like edible jewelry. They were the kind of thing you served when you wanted guests to remember your party, but not how they got home. And once you had one, you always reached for another. Of course, this was just one side of the table. Right next to it sat something much stranger. It jiggled, it sparkled, and believe it or not, it was made of ham. In the smoky cafes of Paris and the tucked-away speakeasies of New York, a vivid green spirit earned both fame and infamy. Absinthe, the original form. Known as the Green Fairy, this potent liquor wasn't just a drink, it was a ritual. Traditionally prepared by slowly dripping ice-cold water over a sugar cube balanced on a slotted spoon, the absinthe would cloud into a pale, opalescent swirl. To fans of the 1920s, this was sophistication in a glass. The main ingredients, wormwood, anise, and fennel, weren't the issue. It was thujone, a chemical compound found in wormwood, that stirred the controversy. Accusations flew that absinthe caused hallucinations, madness, and moral decay. The drink became a scapegoat for everything from artistic eccentricity to violent crime. One Swiss man famously blamed it for murdering his entire family, which helped fuel a global ban. Absinthe had become deeply embedded in European and American culture, particularly among writers, painters, and bohemians. But by the 1910s and 20s, bans spread like wildfire. The U.S. followed suit in 1912, nearly a decade before Prohibition, citing health concerns and public pressure. Maple cream sandwiches were dessert on a dime. All you needed was graham crackers, a bit of maple-flavored frosting or whipped cream, and a few minutes to assemble. Spread the filling between two crackers, press them together, and chill if time allows. That was it. No baking, no pans, just a sugar fix made from pantry staples. Maple syrup was not rare in the 1920s, especially in the Northeast, where small producers tapped trees each spring. Imitation maple flavoring also became popular and cheap. These sandwiches were common in homes that needed dessert without making a pie or cake. They were crisp, sweet, and small enough that you could have 2 or 3 without guilt. Sometimes they were topped with powdered sugar or chocolate, but the original needed no extras. It was proof that a good treat did not need much, just a little creativity and a sweet tooth. Celery Victor. Sounds like a magician or a silent film actor, but nope, it is a salad. A very chilled, very marinated, very serious celery salad that came straight out of elite San Francisco dining rooms in the early 1900s. Now, do not get it twisted. This was not some limp, sad little stalk on a plate. This celery was blanched, just long enough to make it tender, then soaked in a tangy vinaigrette of vinegar, lemon juice, and a whisper of herbs. After a long chill in the icebox, it came out crisp, cool, and ready for the spotlight. Restaurants like the Saint. Francis Hotels swore by this dish, serving it to guests who probably just spent 2 hours deciding between pearl earrings or a feathered headband. It was clean, it was light, it was unapologetically fancy. And unlike a lot of heavy, rich dishes from the era, Celery Victor was a palate cleanser, something refreshing to balance out all the cream and fried goodness of the day. It was also shockingly easy to make at home, which is how it eventually ended up on regular dinner tables too. Just a little vinegar and chill time, and suddenly your celery was in a whole new tax bracket. And speaking of making the most out of what you had, up next is a dessert with no milk, no eggs, and somehow all the flavor you could ever want. Elegant dinner parties in the early 20th century often featured a dish that would be unthinkable on modern menus: canned sea turtle. Prized for its rich, tender meat, sea turtle was considered a luxury item, not just in the United States but throughout Europe. Turtle soup, especially made from green sea turtles, was a favorite among the elite, and by the 1920s, commercial canning made it accessible to a broader audience. You didn't need to live near the coast or wrangle one yourself. You could simply order a tin through a catalog or find it in upscale grocers. The meat was typically simmered into a thick soup or stew, often with sherry, vegetables, and spices. Some recipes called for mock turtle alternatives, using calf's head, but the real thing was the gold standard. In fact, sea turtle was so valued that it became a diplomatic dish, served at presidential banquets and state dinners. The demand, however, outpaced the supply. By mid-century, overhunting and habitat loss drove several sea turtle species toward extinction. International protections eventually made harvesting or selling sea turtles and their meat illegal in most of the world. Banana and mayonnaise sandwiches were one of those strange little miracles of the 1920s kitchen. It sounds odd now, but back then, the sweet and savory combination was not only accepted, it was celebrated. Sliced bananas were laid gently on white bread, and mayonnaise acted like the glue that held the whole thing together. No butter, no jam, just banana and mayo. It was a quick lunchbox staple for children and adults alike, partly because both ingredients were cheap and widely available. Bananas had become more common thanks to improved transportation, and mayonnaise was starting to show up in homes as a ready-made product. It helped that refrigeration was still unreliable for many families, so shelf-stable or naturally resistant foods were a practical choice. This sandwich was quick to prepare, filling enough to stand in for a small meal, and easy to eat on the go. It was also one of those things that people either loved or quietly avoided, depending on which side of the sandwich war you fell on. But if your family made it in the 1920s, chances are you have at least one memory of someone munching on this creamy, fruity creation with zero hesitation. Brown chicken fricassee with dumplings was one of those meals that made the house smell like something good was always about to happen. This was Sunday dinner at its finest, where the chicken was not just cooked, it was respected. The meat was browned first in a heavy pan to lock in flavor, then slow simmered in a creamy, roux-thickened gravy that clung to every bite. It was warm, it was rich, it was patient. You did not rush a dish like this. And then, of course, came the dumplings. Fluffy, soft, and cooked right on top of the bubbling pot like they were steaming under a gravy-scented cloud. Families from coast to coast made this with whatever they had. Leftover vegetables, toss them in, a splash of canned milk, even better. This dish made people feel safe. It filled stomachs and silenced complaints in households that could not afford much else. And sure, it took a few hours to get just right, but you could not put a clock on comfort. What made it special was not just the taste, it was the tradition. You passed it down, you passed it around, and by the time the last dumpling disappeared, the world always felt a little more forgiving. But if your stomach was full and your soul needed something a bit more refined, maybe even glamorous, then the next dish might be your kind of vintage. Hidden beneath a linen napkin and centuries of controversy, one of the most secretive dishes in culinary history was quietly devoured: ortolan bunting. This tiny songbird, no bigger than a thumb, was considered a delicacy among French gourmets and even found its way to American fine dining circles in the early 20th century. It wasn't necessity that put ortolan on the table. It was indulgence, pure and simple. Traditionally, the bird was captured at night using nets, then fattened in darkness, often with millet and figs. It was drowned in armagnac, roasted whole, and served intact, bones, beak, and all. Diners would cover their heads with a napkin while eating, supposedly to trap the aroma, though critics argued it was really to hide the act from God, or perhaps from dinner companions with less adventurous appetites. By the late 20th century, the ortolan population had sharply declined due to overhunting and habitat loss. France eventually banned its commercial sale in 1999 under pressure from environmentalists and the European Union. Today, catching or consuming the bird can carry heavy penalties, although black market dinners have reportedly continued in secret. Tomato jelly sandwiches were not meant to be sweet. These were not breakfast jams. Tomato jelly was savory, made by boiling tomato juice with vinegar, salt, and just enough gelatin to hold its shape. It was poured into molds, chilled, and sliced like meat. Then it was layered between bread, sometimes with lettuce, sometimes with mayonnaise or cream cheese, always served cold. The texture was curious, but the flavor was sharp and bright. Molded foods were popular in the 1920s, and gelatin was no longer a luxury. Recipes like this showed off clever presentation and stretched ingredients farther. These sandwiches were ideal for picnics and hot days when turning on the stove was not an option. Strange by today's standards, but in their time, they made perfect sense. Now, ham mousse with pineapple glaze was not exactly a dish. It was more of a sculpture, a centerpiece, something that demanded a second look, if only to ask, is that meat? Yes, it was. Whipped ham, mixed with gelatin, cream, and just enough seasoning to convince you it was fancy. It was molded into rings or domes, depending on how theatrical you were feeling that day, and finished with a glossy glaze made of pineapple juice and sugar. Some people even added maraschino cherries for flair. If it sounds unusual, that is because it was. But it was also kind of brilliant. You could stretch a small amount of meat into a showpiece, feed a crowd, and still have something sweet, salty, savory to talk about for days. And it worked especially well at church potlucks and ladies' luncheons where the goal was to impress and feed in that exact order. Just imagine everyone in pearls crowding around a jelly meat ring like it was the birth of Christ. And yet, somehow, it worked. But if mousse was not your thing, maybe you were more into something warm, creamy, and sitting proudly in a puff pastry shell. Long before anti-smoking campaigns and warning labels, marketing departments had a different idea: get them while they're young. That's how cigarette-infused candy found its way into the hands and mouths of kids across America in the 1920s. These weren't just sweets shaped like cigarettes. Some early versions actually contained traces of tobacco or nicotine flavoring, all wrapped in packaging that mimicked the real deal. The concept wasn't satire, it was strategy. Candy companies and tobacco brands knew what they were doing, and no one was really stopping them. These candies were made from sugar, corn syrup, and powdered flavoring, often chalky in texture, with one end dyed red to resemble a lit tip. Children would mimic adults, puffing pretend smoke before biting into the stick. It wasn't just play, it was training. Some brands even advertised the experience as just like Dad's. There wasn't a national outcry until the 1950s, when public health data began linking smoking to cancer. Over time, more pediatricians and policymakers raised alarms about these candies normalizing smoking habits. Celery stuffed with Roquefort or peanut butter was a timeless plate filler. Whether for guests or just yourself, this dish kept showing up in 1920s kitchens. You cleaned the celery, cut it into ribs, and smeared it with a filling. Roquefort if you were fancy, peanut butter if you were not. That was it. No stove, no oven. Crunchy, creamy, cold, and ready in minutes. Hostesses used it to pat out trays, and families loved how fast it came together. The cheese brought salt and tang, the peanut butter brought protein. Either way, it hit the spot. The dish was easy to scale, make 5 or 50. In an era full of molded salads and layered desserts, celery sticks like these kept things simple. They added texture, color, and something to chew on without costing much. Quick, tidy, and strangely satisfying, they earned their place at every table. Now listen, I know prunes get a bad rap today, but back then, prune whip was the belle of the dessert ball. It was a cloud of sweetness made from stewed prunes, sugar, and beaten egg whites. Sounds weird, tastes amazing. It was the kind of dessert that proved you could be both budget-conscious and bougie. There was no flour, no butter, just technique. You boiled the prunes down until they were soft and syrupy, then folded them into stiff egg whites like you were making a meringue with a secret. Once chilled, it became something you could spoon into a fancy glass, top with a mint leaf if you were feeling extra, and serve to your guests with a knowing smile. It was sweet, light, tangy, and perfect for hot evenings when no one wanted to touch an oven. Plus, it was healthy, or at least that is what they told themselves. That made it the rare dessert you could go back for twice and still feel like you were watching your figure. But hey, if you were craving something more golden, crunchy, and kissed by the sea, the next dish had you covered. In high-end banquets and wedding halls of the early 20th century, few dishes signaled wealth and prestige quite like shark fin soup. Imported from China and served in upscale restaurants from San Francisco to New York, it was a luxury that symbolized success, not sustenance. At the time, Americans were embracing international cuisines, and shark fin quickly became a showpiece in fine dining circles, especially in cities with large Chinese communities. The preparation was meticulous. The fins were dried, cleaned, and soaked for hours before being simmered in a rich broth, often with chicken, ham, or mushrooms to boost the flavor. Because here's the kicker: shark fin itself is nearly tasteless. What it brought to the dish was texture, not taste, along with a tradition that dated back centuries in Chinese imperial kitchens. But as demand rose, the supply chain took a dark turn. The practice of shark finning, removing the fins and discarding the rest of the shark at sea, drew global outrage. Entire species faced population collapse, and the ecological consequences became impossible to ignore. In response, states like California, New York, and Hawaii enacted bans on shark fin sales, joining a growing list of countries with similar laws. Buttered noodles with parsley were the weekday workhorse of many kitchens. You boiled the noodles, drained them fast, and tossed them with butter and chopped herbs. That was dinner, or lunch, or breakfast, if nothing else was around. Parsley and butter were easier to come by than meat or eggs. A warm, buttery bowl felt like comfort without the cost. Kids loved it for its plainness. Adults loved it because it was always ready, and it never took more than 10 minutes. The recipe came from European kitchens, but by the 1920s it was everywhere. It was not fancy, it was dependable. Codfish balls with salt pork gravy were born in New England, but somehow found their way onto breakfast plates all over the country. These were not your average fish cakes. No breadcrumbs, no fluff, just flaked salted cod, mashed potatoes, and seasoning, rolled into balls and fried until golden brown and audibly crunchy. And then came the magic touch: salt pork gravy. This was rendered pork fat, thickened with flour and milk, poured generously over the fish balls like someone had finally figured out what heaven tastes like. The contrast was perfect. The salty gravy brought out the briny depth of the cod, and the crispy outside gave way to that soft, starchy middle. You could eat them with a fork or just go caveman style and pop them whole. These were weekday meals, Sunday suppers, and next day breakfast, because yes, you always made too many on purpose. People who had never even seen the ocean made codfish balls a kitchen staple, thanks to their affordability, their versatility, and, let's be honest, that gravy. They were the kind of dish that felt like it had been passed down in whispers from one generation to the next, and if you were lucky, they came with a side of something sweet, sticky, and slathered in cream cheese. Those kitchens went quiet one by one. If you remember the taste, share it. Like, subscribe, and tell us what she made.